The orbital palace of Aurelian floated in silence above a blue-white world, its outer rings turning slowly to maintain gravity, while long observation corridors opened toward the stars. From certain angles, the palace resembled a crown suspended in darkness, every spire lit by gentle currents of energy. Nathan had been assigned to the eastern promenade, a stretch of polished floor and transparent wall that revealed a drifting field of distant cargo ships inching toward the docking arrays. It was a quiet post, which meant it was considered boring, which meant it was exactly the kind of post given to reliable guards who did their jobs without complaint. Nathan did not mind boredom. Boredom meant no emergencies, no alarms, and no nobles shouting about misplaced ceremonial pets. He still remembered the time a visiting ambassador's floating reptile had escaped and spent 2 hours gliding through the ventilation ducts while half the palace security tried to coax it out with fruit. The creature had eventually emerged on its own, looking deeply offended by the entire experience. A soft chime sounded in his earpiece as the patrol network updated. Everything normal. Everything quiet. Nathan folded his hands behind his back and continued watching the stars. Footsteps approached from the corridor behind him, accompanied by the faint whisper of silk and the softer rhythm of attendants trying very hard not to sound like attendants. Nathan straightened automatically. Princess Elara stepped into the promenade, her presence transforming the space as effortlessly as sunrise transforms a horizon. She looked at first glance like any human woman, tall, graceful, with calm, intelligent eyes. But the long, elegant ears that curved slightly backward from her temples marked her unmistakably as one of the Aurelian people. Her dark hair fell in smooth waves, and the pale silver fabric of her gown shimmered with embedded threads that adjusted to the light, scattering tiny reflections across the walls like drifting stars. Nathan inclined his head respectfully. "Your Highness." "Guard Nathan," she said, her voice warm, almost amused, as if she carried a private thought she had not yet decided to share. He returned to stillness, as protocol required. Conversation was not forbidden, but neither was it encouraged unless necessary. Elara lingered near the transparent wall, gazing at the distant ships. For a time, neither of them spoke. Behind her, two attendants whispered quietly. One of them stifled a laugh, and Nathan caught fragments of their conversation about a nobleman who had apparently attempted to compose a love poem to the princess using only words that rhymed with her name. The result, judging by the muffled laughter, had been disastrous. Elara sighed softly, though there was humor in it. "I sometimes think," she said without turning, "that half the galaxy believes poetry is the most efficient method of diplomacy." Nathan allowed himself the smallest smile. "If that were true, Your Highness, the military academies would have replaced tactical training with rhyming lessons." She turned then, studying him with interest. "And you would excel at that, I assume?" "I would be a catastrophe, Your Highness. My instructors once told me I write reports like a malfunctioning cargo manifest." That earned a quiet laugh from her, light and genuine, and Nathan felt a brief, unexpected sense of satisfaction before reminding himself to remain composed. A procession entered the far end of the promenade. 3 visiting nobles accompanied by advisors and hovering translation drones that bobbed politely at shoulder height. One of the nobles adjusted his cloak repeatedly, glancing toward the princess as if hoping she would notice the dramatic motion. She did not. Nathan observed the scene with professional detachment, though inwardly he could not help wondering how anyone could believe that exaggerated gestures would succeed where simple courtesy so often failed. Still, it was not his place to judge. His duty was to stand, to watch, to ensure safety, nothing more. The nobles approached, bowed deeply, and began speaking in elaborate formal phrases. Nathan tuned out the details, focusing instead on the rhythm of the room, the subtle hum of environmental systems, the distant vibration of docking clamps engaging, the soft whir of a maintenance drone polishing the floor 20 meters away. The palace was alive in 1,000 small ways, each sound part of a vast, carefully maintained order. At last the visitors withdrew, leaving the promenade quiet again. Elara exhaled slowly, as if setting down an invisible weight. "Guard Nathan," she said, turning to him once more. "Tell me honestly, do you ever find this place overwhelming?" He considered the question carefully. "Only when someone releases a diplomatic reptile into the ventilation system, Your Highness." She blinked, then laughed, a bright, unguarded sound that echoed softly against the glass. I heard about that. The ambassador claimed it was a cultural misunderstanding. I believe the reptile disagreed, Nathan said. For a moment they simply stood there, sharing the quiet after laughter. Nathan became aware, not for the first time, that speaking with her felt unexpectedly easy. That realization made him slightly uneasy, and he retreated inward, restoring the careful distance he always maintained. Elara noticed, though she said nothing. Instead, she stepped closer to the observation wall, her reflection faintly visible against the stars. Do you ever wish, she said softly, to travel beyond patrol routes and duty shifts, to see what lies out there, not as a guard, but as a person? Nathan followed her gaze to the distant lights of passing ships. Sometimes, he admitted, but wishing and doing are different things. Duty has a way of defining the shape of one's life. And are you content with that shape? He hesitated, surprised by the question. Content enough, he said at last. She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to understand something that remained just beyond reach. Then she inclined her head slightly. Thank you for answering honestly. Another chime sounded in Nathan's earpiece, signaling the end of his watch cycle in 10 minutes. He acknowledged it silently. Elara turned to leave, her attendants falling into step behind her. At the threshold, she paused and glanced back. Guard Nathan, she said. I think you may be the only person in this palace who speaks to me without trying to impress me. He was unsure how to respond to that, so he simply said, I speak as required, Your Highness. Her eyes held a flicker of amusement. Yes, she said. Exactly so. She departed, and the promenade fell quiet once more. Nathan resumed his watch, staring out at the endless dark. Yet something in the silence felt subtly different now, as if a small, invisible shift had occurred. One he could not yet name, but which lingered in his thoughts long after the stars themselves began to blur into the steady rhythm of passing time. The summit ships began arriving 3 days later, their hulls gleaming in colors that shifted with the angle of light. Nathan stood at his assigned position near the grand reception corridor, watching the procession unfold through the wide archways. Each delegation entered with its own peculiar sense of ceremony. Some marched in precise formation, others drifted forward in low-gravity harnesses, and one group arrived accompanied by a hovering musical sphere that emitted a slow, dramatic chorus that sounded faintly like whales arguing with cathedral bells. The palace staff moved with calm efficiency, but the air carried a restless energy. Diplomats, nobles, and military officers filled the corridors, their conversations overlapping in a low, constant murmur. The palace AI adjusted lighting, temperature, and acoustics automatically, attempting to keep everyone comfortable. Though Nathan suspected no system could truly make rival ambassadors comfortable in the same room. A fellow guard named Ryan stepped beside him during a brief rotation. Have you seen the delegation from Varel? Ryan murmured. They brought a poet. A poet, Nathan repeated. Yes, apparently he intends to compose an epic praising the princess before the summit ends. Nathan kept his expression neutral. That seems ambitious. Ryan leaned closer. He started reciting in the docking bay. Half the technicians pretended their comms were malfunctioning so they could leave. Nathan almost smiled. A practical solution. The corridor brightened slightly as Princess Elara entered, accompanied by her attendants and advisors. She wore formal attire suited to the occasion, a fitted silver and deep blue garment that caught the light with every step. Her long ears were adorned with delicate rings of crystal that shimmered faintly, each piece representing a different allied world. The sight drew immediate attention. Conversations paused, heads turned. Nathan noticed the change in the atmosphere, the way a sailor notices a shift in wind. It was not only admiration, but expectation, calculation, and ambition. Every visitor seemed to see not a person, but an opportunity. The first suitor approached within minutes, a tall officer from a frontier fleet, his uniform heavy with medals. He bowed deeply and began speaking in a tone so grand that even the translation drones hesitated, as if struggling to keep up with the elaborate phrasing. Nathan heard fragments about honor, destiny, and the alignment of stars. Elara listened politely, her expression composed. Nathan, standing several meters away, found his attention drifting to a maintenance drone that had paused near the ceiling, apparently captivated by the speech. Its optical lens rotated slowly, and for a moment Nathan had the absurd impression that the machine was considering whether it should applaud. The officer concluded with a flourish and stepped back, clearly satisfied. Elara thanked him with courteous grace, and he departed, walking with the slightly stiff posture of someone convinced he had made a profound impression. Rian leaned closer again. "That's the third today." Nathan kept his voice low. "I hope the poet paces himself." Later that afternoon, Nathan was assigned to the outer garden dome, a vast chamber filled with alien vegetation arranged around winding paths and pools of luminous water. Artificial sunlight filtered through layered panels above, casting a warm glow over leaves that shimmered in hues of turquoise and gold. Small floating creatures, part plant, part animal, drifted lazily between branches, trailing faint lines of light like living comets. The dome was quiet, a refuge from the noise of the summit. Nathan stood near one of the pathways, listening to the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of environmental systems. He heard footsteps and turned. Princess Elara approached alone without attendants, her pace unhurried. She paused near a pool where bioluminescent organisms glowed beneath the surface like scattered stars. "I suspected I might find at least one place in the palace where no one is reciting poetry," she said. Nathan inclined his head. "Your Highness." She glanced at the water, then back at him. "Do you know that one ambassador compared my eyes to twin quasars this morning?" Nathan considered this. "I hope he explained what a quasar is." "He did, at length." Nathan allowed himself a faint smile. "That sounds exhausting." "It was," she said, and for a moment the formal composure slipped, revealing genuine amusement. "I am beginning to suspect that admiration becomes less flattering when repeated endlessly." They walked slowly along the path, not side by side, but near enough for conversation to feel natural. Nathan remained aware of protocol, of distance, of the invisible lines that defined their positions. Yet the quiet of the dome made those lines feel less rigid, as if the world beyond the glass walls had softened them. "Tell me," Elara said after a moment, "do the guards make wagers about how many proposals I will receive during the summit?" Nathan hesitated. "Not officially." "Unofficially?" "There is a pool," he admitted. "Ryan has placed his credits on 23. She laughed softly. "And you?" "I declined to participate." "Why?" "I do not enjoy losing money, Your Highness, and I suspect the number will exceed all predictions." She studied him, her expression thoughtful. "You always answer carefully." "I try to answer honestly." They reached a section of the dome where the ceiling panels shifted to reveal a narrow window of open space, the stars visible in their cold brilliance. For a moment they stood in silence, watching a freighter pass, its engines glowing like distant embers. "Elara," she said quietly, then seemed to catch herself and added, "You may call me Elara when we are alone here. Titles grow heavy after a while." Nathan felt a flicker of uncertainty. "I am not sure that would be appropriate." "That," she said with a faint smile, "is precisely why I suggested it." He did not reply, and after a moment she let the matter rest. A sudden rustling sound came from the nearby foliage, followed by a sharp, indignant chirp. A small floating creature shot out from the branches and darted across the path, pursued by a palace gardener waving a scanning device. "Apologies, Your Highness," the gardener called breathlessly. "It escaped its habitat again." The creature emitted a sound that strongly resembled laughter and vanished into a cluster of glowing leaves. Elara covered her mouth, trying not to laugh, and Nathan felt the tension of the day dissolve into something lighter. "Even the wildlife wishes to avoid formal gatherings," Nathan said. "Wise creatures," she replied. They continued walking, and Nathan found himself speaking more freely than he intended, telling her about patrol routines, about the quiet hours of night watch when the palace seemed to sleep, about the strange comfort of listening to the distant hum of engines. Elara listened with genuine interest, asking questions not out of politeness, but curiosity. At last they reached the exit of the dome. Voices and footsteps echoed faintly from the corridors beyond, the noise of the summit returning like a tide. "Thank you," she said softly, "for the conversation." It was my duty, Nathan replied. No, she said, her eyes warm with quiet certainty. It was not. She turned and walked back toward the palace, leaving Nathan standing at the threshold of the garden, watching the place where she had been. The summit continued, the suitors continued, the palace continued its endless rhythm, but something within that rhythm had begun to shift, subtle as the turning of a distant star, and Nathan could feel it even if he did not yet understand what it meant. The summit stretched into its second week, and the palace seemed to breathe differently, as if the walls themselves had grown tired of speeches. Nathan's duties rotated more frequently now, the security network adjusting to the constant movement of visitors. He found himself assigned to corridors he rarely patrolled before, escort routes, and occasionally the upper galleries where dignitaries liked to stroll and pretend they were not measuring each other's influence with every polite remark. It was during one of these rotations that he began to notice a pattern. Princess Elara appeared more often in the sectors where he was posted. At first he assumed it was coincidence. The palace was vast, but certain routes were common, and the summit required her presence in many places. Yet the pattern persisted. Twice she passed through a gallery that had no scheduled events. Once she requested an inspection of a security checkpoint that had been inspected less than 6 hours earlier. Ryan noticed it too. "You're being inspected again," Ryan murmured one evening as they stood near a transit lift. "At this rate, you'll be the most secure guard in the galaxy." Nathan kept his eyes forward. "Coincidences happen." "Of course," Ryan said solemnly, "and sometimes floating reptiles open doors by accident." Nathan suppressed a sigh. "Focus on your post." "I am focused," Ryan replied. "I am focused on the fact that the princess just walked past 3 other corridors to come through this one." Nathan did not answer. He told himself it meant nothing. That evening he was stationed in the navigation atrium, a wide circular chamber where a holographic projection of nearby star systems rotated slowly in the air. Lines of light traced shipping lanes, diplomatic routes, and the faint distant arcs of exploration vessels venturing beyond charted space. Visitors often gathered here, drawn by the quiet beauty of the display. Elara entered alone. She stepped into the soft glow of the hologram, and the shifting light of distant stars reflected in her eyes. Her long ears caught the illumination, the delicate curves outlined in pale blue. "Guard Nathan," she said, as if greeting him in a quiet garden rather than a public hall. "Your Highness." She studied the projection for a moment. "Do you ever look at this and feel very small?" "Frequently," Nathan said, "though I find it reassuring. It reminds me that most problems are smaller than they appear." "That is an optimistic interpretation." "I try to be practical." She smiled faintly. "Practicality may be the rarest quality in this palace." A group of diplomats entered at the far side of the atrium, their voices echoing faintly. Elara glanced toward them, then back at Nathan. "Walk with me," she said. It was not quite an order, not quite a request. Nathan hesitated only a moment before stepping beside her, maintaining a respectful distance as they moved along the curved walkway. They passed beneath the holographic projection, stars drifting silently above them. The air carried a faint scent of ionized metal from the projection emitters, a smell Nathan had always associated with quiet nights on watch. "I have been reading reports about frontier colonies," Elara said. "Some of them are so remote that supply ships arrive only twice a year. Imagine living where the sky never changes, where the same stars hang overhead every night for generations." Nathan considered this. "I think I would miss the noise." "The noise?" "The maintenance drones arguing with each other," he said. "The cooks complaining about delivery schedules. Ryan attempting to tell jokes." She laughed softly. "Are they very bad?" "Catastrophic," Nathan said. "Last week he spent 5 minutes explaining why a quantum physicist should never play cards with a time traveler." "And why is that?" "Because the traveler always knows what you're holding." She shook her head, smiling, and for a moment the weight she carried seemed to lift. They reached a quieter section of the atrium, where the walls curved inward, forming an alcove. The voices of the diplomats faded into the distance. For a time they stood in silence, watching the slow rotation of the stars. "Elara," she said suddenly, and this time she did not correct herself. "Do you know what I envy about you?" Nathan blinked. "I cannot imagine there is much to envy." I envy your freedom to be unnoticed, she said, to walk through a corridor without everyone watching, without every word being measured and remembered. Nathan shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the intensity of her gaze. Being unnoticed is not always a gift. No, she agreed, but neither is being seen constantly. A small maintenance drone drifted into the alcove, paused, and emitted a polite chime. Apologies, it said in a cheerful voice. This area is scheduled for cleaning in approximately 12 minutes. Please continue existing elsewhere. Nathan stared at it. Elara covered her mouth, trying not to laugh. Continue existing elsewhere? She repeated. The Palace A I has been experimenting with conversational language, Nathan said. Results have been mixed. The drone hovered expectantly, as if waiting for them to vanish. Nathan stepped aside and Elara followed, both of them smiling. They resumed walking, and Nathan became aware of a quiet tension beneath the ease of their conversation. He could not deny that he enjoyed these moments, yet each one made him more certain that he should be careful, more distant, more disciplined. The distance between them was not merely physical, it was written into the structure of their lives. At the end of the corridor, they stopped. Beyond the wide window, a line of starships was departing, their engines flaring one by one as they slipped into faster-than-light corridors. The light filled the chamber in brief, brilliant pulses. Sometimes, Elara said softly, I wonder what it would be like to leave all this behind. Nathan followed her gaze. And go where? Anywhere, she said. Someplace where no one knows my name. He was silent for a moment. I think, he said carefully, that wherever you went, people would still know who you are. She looked at him, searching his face as if trying to understand something deeper than his words. Then she nodded slightly. Perhaps, she said. Footsteps echoed in the corridor behind them. Advisors, attendants, the inevitable return of duty. Elara straightened, the quiet ease of the moment fading as she resumed the composure expected of her. Thank you, Nathan, she said quietly, for walking with me. He inclined his head. It was my duty. She held his gaze for a moment, as if weighing that answer, then turned and walked away, her figure gradually disappearing into the light and movement of the palace. Nathan remained by the window, watching the last of the departing ships vanish into the darkness. He told himself, as he always did, that these conversations meant nothing, that they were simply the passing exchanges of a princess and a guard. Yet the thought no longer convinced him as easily as it once had, and the realization lingered in his mind like the fading glow of a star long after it had slipped beyond sight. The summit reached its most demanding phase, and the palace moved in a constant rhythm of negotiations, receptions, and late-night strategy meetings. Nathan's patrol schedule shifted again, placing him more frequently in the inner residential sectors, where access was restricted and the corridors were quieter. The lighting there was softer, designed to mimic the gentle dusk of Elara's homeworld, and the silence often felt deeper than anywhere else in the palace. Nathan preferred these assignments. Fewer visitors meant fewer speeches, fewer exaggerated bows, and far less poetry. One evening, as he stood at a junction overlooking a narrow balcony that faced open space, he heard footsteps approaching from the private wing. Elara emerged not in ceremonial attire, but in a simpler garment, a dark blue fabric that moved easily as she walked. Without the formal ornaments, she seemed younger, less distant, though the calm confidence in her expression remained unchanged. Guard Nathan, she said quietly. Your Highness. She glanced toward the balcony. Walk with me. He followed, maintaining the careful distance he had trained himself never to forget. Beyond the transparent barrier, the planet below filled half the sky, its oceans reflecting sunlight in vast shifting patterns. Storm systems moved slowly across the surface like enormous living things. For a time they stood without speaking. Do you ever feel, she said at last, that the palace is not truly silent, even when no one is speaking? Nathan considered the question. Yes, the systems are always running. Air circulation, structural fields, navigation arrays. There is always a sound beneath the silence. I don't mean the machinery, she said softly. I mean expectations, plans, the weight of what everyone believes should happen. Nathan did not answer immediately. He understood more than he wished to admit. A small service drone rolled onto the balcony, paused, and projected a polite holographic message. Refreshments available upon request. It waited expectantly. Elara looked at it. Do you ever notice how persistent they are? They are programmed to be helpful, Nathan said. The drone emitted a hopeful chime. No refreshments, Elara said gently. The drone paused, then projected a new message. Are you certain? Nathan coughed, disguising a laugh. It takes its duty seriously. I see that, she said, smiling faintly. Perhaps I should appoint it to the council. It would be less stubborn than some of the ministers. The drone lingered a moment longer, then rolled away with what seemed, somehow, like disappointment. They moved farther along the balcony, where the light was dimmer and the sounds of the palace faded. Nathan became aware that she had chosen this place deliberately, far from attendants and advisors, far from listening devices and formal obligations. Elara, she said quietly, as if testing the sound of her own name in his presence. He felt a faint tightening in his chest but said nothing. I have been thinking, she continued, about the conversations we've had, about the way you speak to me. Do you know what I notice most? I cannot guess, Your Highness. You never try to impress me, she said. You never search for words that will please me. You simply answer. That is the safest course, Nathan said. For whom? For both of us. She studied him, her gaze steady. And yet it is not the course most people choose. He looked out at the planet below, avoiding her eyes. Most people have something to gain. And you do not? Nathan hesitated. The question unsettled him more than he expected. I have my duty, he said at last. That is enough. She stepped closer, though still not near enough to break the invisible boundary he kept between them. Is it? The silence stretched. Nathan felt the weight of her attention, the quiet intensity of it, and he struggled to hold to the certainty that had always guided him, that this distance was necessary, that it protected them both. A sudden burst of static echoed from the corridor behind them, followed by an irritated mechanical voice. Maintenance request denied. Maintenance request denied. Please stop attempting to override authorized protocols. Nathan turned. A cleaning drone was engaged in what appeared to be a slow, determined argument with a wall panel. Again? Nathan muttered. The drone emitted a series of indignant beeps. It believes, Nathan said dryly, that the panel is hiding dust from it. Elara laughed, the sound light and unrestrained, and for a moment all tension dissolved. I admire its dedication, she said. It is relentless, Nathan agreed, once it attempted to polish a reflection on the floor. The laughter faded into a quieter stillness. Alara's expression grew thoughtful again, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than before. Nathan, may I ask you something honestly? Yes. Why do you keep such distance from me? The question struck him with unexpected force. He had anticipated many things, but not this. Because, he said slowly, choosing each word with care, it is appropriate. That is not a reason, she said gently. It is a rule. He met her eyes then, and for a moment the careful composure he carried felt fragile. Because, he said more quietly, someone like you could never want someone like me. The words hung between them, stark and undeniable. Elara did not speak at once. She looked at him as if seeing him clearly for the first time, not as a guard or a figure in uniform, but as a person carrying a quiet certainty about his place in the world. You are wrong, she said at last. Nathan felt a faint, uneasy stirring in his chest, a sense that something was shifting, though he did not yet understand how. Before he could answer, footsteps approached from the corridor, attendants searching, voices calling softly for the princess. The moment broke like a surface disturbed by a falling stone. Elara stepped back, the composure of her position settling over her once more, but her eyes lingered on him, thoughtful and searching. We will speak again, she said quietly. Yes, Your Highness. She turned and walked toward the voices, leaving Nathan alone on the balcony. The planet below continued its slow, silent turning, clouds drifting across oceans that had existed for millions of years, before the palace was ever built. Nathan stood there for a long time, staring into the vastness, replaying her words in his mind. You are wrong. He did not know whether the thought comforted him or unsettled him more, only that it lingered, impossible to ignore, like the distant glow of a star that refused to fade. Nathan slept poorly that night, not because of noise. The residential barracks were as quiet as ever, but because his thoughts refused to settle. The words she had spoken on the balcony repeated themselves with stubborn persistence. You are wrong. He rose before his shift, walking the long corridor toward the observation ring, where artificial dawn was just beginning. The stars were fading behind a gradual wash of gold light projected along the inner surface of the dome. The illusion of sunrise was so precise that even after years in the palace, Nathan sometimes felt the instinctive urge to check the horizon for clouds. Ryan found him there, leaning against the railing with a cup of something that smelled aggressively like burned herbs. You look like a man who has been awake too long, Ryan said. I slept, Nathan replied. Poorly then. Nathan said nothing. Ryan sipped his drink and grimaced. I keep telling the mess hall to stop experimenting with nutritional tea. If a beverage tastes like regret, it is not tea. Nathan almost smiled. Why do you keep drinking it? Because one day it might not taste like regret. Hope is important. Nathan shook his head faintly and returned his gaze to the fading stars. The summit schedule resumed, and the palace filled again with movement. Nathan was assigned to escort duty along the inner archives, a sector rarely visited by outsiders. The archives were vast, containing records from centuries of exploration, maps of vanished trade routes, data from extinct civilizations, and recordings of stars that no longer existed. The air there was cooler and the lighting dimmer, designed to preserve delicate materials. Nathan walked the quiet aisles, listening to the faint hum of preservation fields. He heard footsteps behind him and turned. Elara stood at the entrance, alone. Guard Nathan, she said softly. Your Highness. I hoped you might be here, she said. He hesitated. Is there something you require? Yes, she said, her eyes steady. Conversation. They walked slowly between rows of suspended data crystals, each one glowing faintly with stored knowledge. The silence of the archives felt different from other quiet places in the palace, deeper, older, as if the past itself were listening. I have been reading, Elara said, about explorers who traveled beyond charted space. Many of them left without knowing if they would ever return. That requires courage, Nathan said. Or desperation, she replied. Sometimes the two are the same. They paused beside a display showing a holographic star map from an early expedition. The stars flickered faintly, several of them marked in red, systems that had gone dark long ago. Nathan, she said after a moment, do you remember what you told me on the balcony? He felt a tightening in his chest. Yes. You said someone like me could never want someone like you. He remained silent. She turned to face him fully. Why are you so certain of that? Because it is obvious, he said quietly. You are a princess. I am a guard. There are people here who command fleets, who govern entire worlds, men who have accomplished things I will never even attempt. And do you think I measure people that way? I think, he said carefully, that the world measures people that way. Elara studied him, and for a moment he felt as if she were seeing through every defense he had built over the years. The world, she said softly, is often wrong. A small maintenance drone drifted down the aisle behind them, paused and emitted a polite tone. Reminder, whispering is appreciated in archival environments. Excessive volume may disturb the historical atmosphere. Nathan blinked. Historical atmosphere? Yes, the drone said cheerfully. It is very sensitive. Elara laughed quietly, the sound echoing softly among the shelves. The drone hovered a moment longer, as if pleased with itself, then drifted away. Even the machines are dramatic here, she said. It is contagious, Nathan replied. They continued walking, and Nathan found himself speaking more than he intended, about his childhood on a transport station where ships arrived and departed without ceremony, about watching the stars from maintenance platforms, about learning early that most people pass through life unnoticed, and that there was a kind of freedom in that. Elara listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful. "I think," she said at last, "you underestimate how rare it is to meet someone who is content without being seen." "I am not content," Nathan said quietly. "I am practical." "There is a difference?" "Yes," he said. "Contentment is peace. Practicality is acceptance." They reached the far end of the archives, where a wide window revealed the blackness of open space. A single freighter passed slowly, its running lights blinking in patient sequence. "Elara," Nathan said, speaking her name without thinking. She looked at him, and the silence between them deepened, filled with things neither of them yet knew how to say. A sudden clatter echoed behind them. Both turned to see a maintenance unit attempting to stack several storage containers, only to have them slide apart and tumble onto the floor with a series of hollow thumps. The machine emitted a long, mournful tone. "I believe," Nathan said, "it is embarrassed." Elara covered her mouth, laughing softly. "Should we help it?" "I am not certain it would appreciate the audience." The machine began restacking the containers with exaggerated care, as if determined to restore its dignity. The moment of laughter faded into quiet again. Elara turned back to the window, her expression thoughtful. "Nathan," she said, "I am tired of people who want me for what I represent, for what I can give them, for what they imagine I am." He did not answer. "I want," she continued, her voice steady but softer than before, "to be wanted for who I am." Nathan felt the weight of her words settle over him, heavy and undeniable. He knew in that moment that the distance he tried to maintain was becoming harder to hold. Footsteps sounded faintly in the corridor beyond the archives. Attendants searching, schedules continuing, the endless movement of the palace resuming its rhythm. Elara turned toward the exit, then paused. "We will talk again," she said quietly. "Yes," Nathan replied. She walked away, leaving him alone beside the window. The freighter had vanished now, leaving only the stars, cold and distant and unchanging. Nathan stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the archives, and for the first time he began to wonder whether the certainty he had always trusted, the certainty of his place, of his limits, was not as solid as he had believed. Rumors moved through the palace faster than any shuttle in the docking ring. Nathan began to notice it in the smallest ways first: conversations that paused when he entered a room, glances exchanged between attendants, a visiting officer who greeted him with exaggerated politeness, as if suddenly uncertain whether a simple guard might hold unexpected importance. Ryan noticed it too, of course. "You have become interesting," Ryan announced one morning, while they stood near a security console reviewing patrol assignments. "I was always interesting," Nathan replied. Ryan stared at him. "Nathan, the most exciting thing you did last month was reorganize the emergency rations by expiration date. That was necessary. I am not disputing its necessity, I am disputing its excitement." Nathan allowed himself a faint smile. "People will lose interest soon enough." "Perhaps," Ryan said, lowering his voice, "but until then, try not to look as though you are planning to disappear into a ventilation shaft. It only encourages speculation." Nathan said nothing, though he knew Ryan was not entirely wrong. The attention unsettled him. He had spent most of his life being unnoticed, and now he felt as if he were standing under a light he had never asked for. Later that day, he was assigned to the upper transit decks, where transparent corridors connected different sections of the palace. Through the curved walls, the stars shone in vast, silent fields, interrupted occasionally by the passing silhouette of a transport craft. He heard footsteps behind him and did not need to turn to know who it was. "Elara," he said quietly. She stepped beside him, her expression calm but thoughtful. "Nathan." They walked in silence for a time, the faint vibration of distant engines humming through the structure beneath their feet. "I hear," she said at last, "that the palace staff has begun discussing you. I suspected as much. Does it trouble you?" "Yes." She glanced at him. "Because of what they say?" "No," he replied, "because of what it changes." They reached a wide observation platform where a fleet of diplomatic ships hovered in formation, their running lights blinking in synchronized patterns. The sight was beautiful, almost serene, yet Nathan felt the quiet tension beneath it, the negotiations, the rivalries, the fragile balance of power that held everything together. Elara, he said carefully, there is pressure on you to choose an alliance. There is always pressure, she said. It is the background noise of my life. And yet, he said, you continue to spend time with me. She turned to face him fully. Do you wish me to stop? The question caught him off guard. No, he said, more quickly than he intended. Then more quietly, I only wish to understand. So do I, she said. A small courier drone zipped past them, then abruptly reversed and hovered in front of Nathan. A mechanical voice spoke in a brisk tone. Message delivery confirmed. Recipient, Guard Nathan. Priority low. Content, stop reorganizing the training equipment. It confuses everyone. Sender, Sergeant Halver. Elara raised an eyebrow. Nathan sighed. I prefer things to be orderly. I can see that, she said, amused. The drone hovered expectantly. Would you like to reply? Nathan considered this. Reply, order is never confusion. The drone paused. Message sent. Probability of argument, 92%. It zipped away. Elara laughed softly. Even the machines know your habits. They exaggerate, Nathan said. They resumed walking, and the conversation drifted into quieter subjects. Elara spoke about her childhood, about learning to navigate court politics before she was old enough to understand why it mattered. Nathan spoke about his years in training, about long nights on patrol ships, where the only sound was the steady pulse of the engines and the occasional complaint from a cook who believed the universe conspired against proper seasoning. You see, Nathan said, even in deep space, the most serious conflict is often about food. That may be the most universal truth I have heard, Elara replied. They reached a quieter section of the transit deck where the lighting dimmed and the stars seemed closer, brighter. The silence there felt almost sacred. Nathan, she said softly, I have been asked 3 times today which suitor I favor. And what did you answer? That I have not yet decided. He hesitated. Is that true? She looked at him steadily. No. The words settled between them, heavy and undeniable. Nathan felt his heartbeat quicken, though he forced himself to remain still. Then why not tell them? Because they would not understand, she said. They would think it a passing curiosity or an act of defiance. They would not believe that I choose with intention. A distant alarm sounded briefly, then faded, the signal of a docking sequence completing successfully. The sound echoed faintly through the corridor, like the closing note of a distant bell. I am not extraordinary, Nathan said quietly. There are many men here who are braver, stronger, more accomplished. And yet, she said, none of them are you. He had no answer to that. A maintenance drone emerged from a wall panel, extended a small sensor toward them, and announced, air quality optimal, emotional tension elevated, recommendation, deep breathing. Elara stared at it, then burst into laughter. Nathan covered his face with one hand. Can it really measure that? She asked. I sincerely hope not, Nathan said. The drone emitted a satisfied chime and retreated into the wall. The laughter faded, leaving a softer quiet behind it. Elara stepped closer, not enough to break the distance entirely, but enough that Nathan could see the faint reflection of the stars in her eyes. Nathan, she said, her voice calm but filled with quiet certainty, I am not interested in you because you ignored me. I am interested in you because you see me clearly. That is rarer than beauty, rarer than power, rarer than anything this palace offers. He felt the weight of her words settle deep within him, shaking the careful boundaries he had built over years of discipline. I do not know what will come of this, she continued, but I know that what I feel is real. Footsteps echoed in the distance, advisors approaching, voices calling softly for the princess. The moment began to fade, like a star disappearing into the brightness of dawn. Elara stepped back, the composure of her position returning, but her eyes lingered on him, warm and unwavering. We will speak again, she said. Yes, Nathan replied, though his voice was quieter than before. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing beneath the silent stars. For a long time he did not move. The palace hummed around him unchanged, yet everything felt subtly different, as if the course of his life had shifted by a single, irreversible degree, and he was only beginning to understand where that new path might lead. The final days of the summit arrived with an unusual stillness, as if the palace itself sensed that something larger than treaties or alliances was approaching its conclusion. Delegations prepared to depart, corridors gradually emptied, and the constant echo of speeches gave way to the quieter sounds of departure. Cargo drones gliding through loading bays, engines warming in distant hangars, farewell conversations fading into the vastness of space. Nathan stood at his post near the central promenade, watching a line of ships detach from the docking ring one by one. The sight stirred something in him, a quiet realization that endings were not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes they arrived like this in silence, carried away by distant stars. "Guard Nathan," he turned. Elara stood a few steps away, dressed not in ceremonial splendor, but in a simple, elegant uniform of deep silver and blue, the attire of a leader rather than a figure of spectacle. The light caught the curve of her long ears and the calm determination in her expression. "Your Highness," and he said. "Walk with me," she said softly. They moved through a quiet corridor toward a chamber Nathan had never entered before, a circular observation hall reserved for private meetings. The walls were transparent, and beyond them the stars stretched in every direction, uninterrupted by structures or ships. It felt less like a room and more like standing in open space. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "The summit is ending," Elara said at last. "Tomorrow the last delegations will depart. The council has asked for my decision." Nathan felt a tightening in his chest. "And have you given it?" "Yes." He waited, though he was not certain he wanted to hear the answer. "I have declined every proposal," she said quietly. He looked at her, searching her face. "That will cause complications." "It already has," she said, though there was a hint of amusement in her voice. "One ambassador attempted to challenge the council to a debate that lasted 4 hours and ended with everyone agreeing to adjourn for food." Nathan allowed himself a faint smile. "A wise outcome." "Yes," she said. "No one argues effectively while eating." The humor faded into a deeper quiet. Elara stepped closer, her gaze steady. "I told them," she said, "that I will choose my own path, and that my decision will not be based on power or alliances." Nathan felt the weight of what she was saying, the magnitude of it. "And what path is that?" She held his gaze. "One that begins with honesty." Silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken thoughts and the distant hum of the palace systems. "Nathan," she said softly, "do you still believe someone like me could never want someone like you?" He hesitated. For so long that belief had been as solid as gravity itself. Yet everything that had happened, every conversation, every quiet moment beneath the stars, had begun to erode that certainty. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he said at last. "That is a beginning," she replied. He looked out at the stars, gathering his thoughts. "All my life," he said slowly, "I believed my place was fixed, that there were lines you did not cross, roles you did not leave. I thought that accepting that was strength. And now? Now I think, perhaps strength is accepting that the future is not already written." Elara's expression softened, and for a moment the distance between princess and guard seemed to vanish entirely. A sudden mechanical voice interrupted them. "Reminder, this chamber is reserved for quiet reflection. Loud existential revelations may disturb the acoustics." Nathan closed his eyes briefly. "Of course," Elara laughed, the sound warm and bright. "Even now the palace refuses to take us entirely seriously." "I am grateful for that," Nathan said. They stood together in the quiet, and Nathan realized that something within him had changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually, like a star rising beyond the horizon. The fear that had once defined his thoughts had faded, replaced by a steadier understanding. He was still a guard. He was still the same man he had always been. But he no longer believed that who he was made him unworthy of being chosen. "Elara," he said, speaking her name without hesitation. She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw not a princess or a symbol, but a person who had chosen him with clear, unwavering intention. "I don't know what the future will bring," he said, "but I know that I don't want to spend it wondering what might have been." Her smile was quiet, filled with relief and something deeper. "Neither do I," she said. Outside the chamber, a shuttle passed, its engines glowing briefly as it turned toward the stars. The light reflected across the walls, bathing the room in a soft, shifting glow. Later, when they stepped back into the corridors, the palace felt different to Nathan. The same walls, the same lights, the same distant hum of machinery, but no longer a place of rigid boundaries. It was simply a place, one part of a much larger universe. Rian found him a short time later, leaning against a railing near the observation deck. "Well," Ryan said, studying his face, "you look like a man who has either survived a crisis or caused one." "Perhaps both," Nathan said. Rian nodded thoughtfully. "Good. Life would be very dull otherwise." Nathan looked out at the stars once more, and for the first time in years, he did not feel small in their presence. He felt part of something vast and unfolding, a future no longer defined by limits, but by possibilities. And somewhere beyond the endless expanse of light and darkness, ships continued their journeys, stars continued to burn, and the quiet certainty grew within him that sometimes the greatest change in a life does not come from seeking what everyone else desires, but from accepting the one thing that was waiting quietly, patiently, all along.